much for inviting me today, and thank you very much to the OR Society for championing useful analysis and for shortlisting this project for President's Medal. And most importantly, I'd like to thank the team involved in this work. My name is Tom Council. I'm at the Department of Energy and Climate Change, and I run a small bit of it. This particular project we're talking about today had a team of just over a dozen, drawn from about 9 or 10 different institutions around the world. And all the excellent work is mainly theirs that I'm going to talk about today. And what I'm going to talk about is what I think is one of the coolest things and most impactful things that the department's done in the last 6 months. And what it is the global calculator. So I'm going to spend hopefully no more than 15 minutes, give you a quick rundown of the tool. My presentation will be orientated around the criteria that judges are using to benefit the intellectual novel content, the longevity, and its OR process. And then hopefully there'll be time for questions so you can ask more detail anywhere that interests you. Okay, so first, the benefit. So there's a big question that we face as the Department of Energy and Climate Change in the UK. And that's broadly that could 10 billion people, which is the likely population on Earth within my lifetime, all live like me, by which I mean they can eat like I do, travel like I do, have a comfortable home like I do, have all the kind of possessions and belongings and appliances that I do, while we still avoid the worst effects of climate change. So I'm kind of curious, if we did a vote in the room, who thinks, yes, we could? About 20 people? Who thinks, no, we can't? Well, look at that. Okay, that's quite different. So it's obviously a very important question to us as a department when we're going into global negotiations. And my boss is the lead negotiator for the European Union on climate change, because all of our negotiations are predicated on this being true. Yet actually, across the world, and even with the UK government, and even with audiences like this, there's a lot of uncertainty about whether this fact is true or not. And there are not many facts actually out there to help you decide whether it's true or not. So what we tried to do was to put together a piece of analysis, a piece of modelling, that would help explore those issues. And what it is this. Okay. So this is an interactive website that is available for anyone to go to at www.globalcalculator.org. And what it shows on the top left is where the demand and supply of energy globally, both today and in the future, the greenhouse gas emissions, the consequences for the amount of CO2 and greenhouse gases we pump into the atmosphere, and what that might mean for climate change. And what we put down below is a whole bunch of choices about what the future might hold. So, for instance, about how far we might travel on average globally, with a full range ranging from one extreme, where everybody, all 10 billion people, travel like we do in Europe or in America, so significant distances every year, and the other extreme being the lowest thing we can find in credible estimates of, where broadly it's only a slight increase in the global average travel today. And by playing with those choices, it recomputes the global energy demand, energy supply, greenhouse gas emissions, and climate change impact. And we have the same choices for all the different elements of lifestyle, about the appliances you have, the food you eat, the size of your buildings, whether you're comfortable. And then on the supply side, we have all the choices about energy efficiency. At one extreme, vehicles only get more efficient at the current historic trends. At the other extremes, we really push vehicles to be as efficient as we theoretically think most enthusiastic people can make it. And you see the impact on energy demand, energy supply, greenhouse gas emissions, and the temperature in the world. And then ditto for things like, what if we basically deployed at one end no nuclear power globally, if the moratorium on nuclear power expanded out into more and more countries? And the other extreme, what if we built as much nuclear power as the massive enthusiasts for nuclear power propose tiny nuclear reactors, basically based around most of the major cities in the world? And again, it reproduces energy demand, energy supply, greenhouse gas emissions, and the consequences for climate change. And by playing around with this tool, you can then start to address the question about whether or not 10 billion people, or we've got a lever about population, it could be 12 billion, it could be more like 9 billion people, could actually have a particular standard and style of living, and yet we still avoid the worst effects of climate change. It doesn't tell us how to achieve that, it doesn't tell us what policies need to put in place, but at least addresses the question of possibility and how possible or not, and how extreme the views would have to be or not to get there. Which is an important question for us to resolve as a department when we're thinking about negotiations. Not just for ourselves, it's important that we convince other people across the world that it is possible, or if we all agree it's not possible, that we stop doing what we're doing and think of doing something else instead, adaptation, for instance. More prosaically, we, the department, have a rather large budget to spend on deploying technologies. So we spend the order of billions a year trying to help different countries across the world to make a difference to tackle climate change. And this is your money, and it's important it's spelled well and spend it to make a difference. And similarly, by using this sort of tool, we can actually see which technologies make a big difference. So quite commonly, people will come to us about the massive role of, say, geothermal in terms of tackling climate change, and we should put all our money into geothermal, particularly in countries around the world. And we can explore that and go, okay, what happens if we maximise our deployment of geothermal as opposed to deploying none? And we can broadly see that it makes, at the global level, no difference whatsoever. Much more difference comes from things like wind power. But the interesting thing that we've discovered in doing this work is actually the really big difference that we make and the really important questions that are actually about tackling climate change are actually about yields of crops. So what we haven't actually considered before in the way we spend the money is what we actually need to do is to increase the yields of food crops, of livestock, and ideally of biocrops as well, but particularly those three, in order to free up enough land so that we do not need to deforest to give people a healthy lifestyle, because deforestation triggers massive climate change impact. And so that we have enough spare land so that once we've fed everybody, we can actually use some of that land to grow biocrops to replace fossil fuels. And therefore that yield question is really critical and not being thought about in the way we spend our £3 or £4 billion a year as a department. So that's the benefit of the tool. The intellectual content and novel content, perhaps I'll stop thinking about it. So the intellectual content, I think, should be fairly clear. In the sense, what we've done here is brought together analysis of potentials of a lot of different technologies and lifestyle areas and put them all together in one spot. And we've actually started to show impacts. So we also show the impacts on, say, the transport sector, buildings, manufacturing, resources. We show the impact on land. We can show the impact on whether we will run out of fossil fuels of different sorts or not, or perhaps we will run out of uranium or not. We will show the impact on costs, about whether one approach costs more than another approach, and so on and so forth. And if I can find the right chart here, you can see some of the sort of intellectual content in the simple Sankey diagram that we have here, which shows energy flows, and this is a more complicated model of the flows of energy through this model that we have here. So that's the intellectual content. It's all there. The actual novel content that I'd like to draw attention to is that this is an Excel spreadsheet, actually, behind the scenes. And by that, I mean it's not just that we have all the assumptions in an Excel spreadsheet, it's every calculation, every formula, every output, every piece of the entire model is an Excel spreadsheet. And a novel thing that we've done is we've developed a process which can take Excel spreadsheets and automatically translate them into the C programming language, which we can then use as a back-end for websites and for running Monte Carlo analysis and optimizations in a very fast way. And the translation between Excel and web front-end verifies that it's correct as it's doing that translation, which we found enormously helpful, which is why I'd like to turn to the longevity question. Because when we were thinking about doing this approach, it was basically for two reasons. One was about longevity, and the other was about the way we thought we had to assemble the team. So on longevity, we found that models last longest when they are actually used. And so one of our challenges was to find a way of getting the results of this analysis, this kind of analytic approach, into the hands of people that actually make decisions in a way that they can keep doing it and keep thinking about it. So my boss, who does the climate change negotiations, his peers across the world, my colleague who does that spending of those billions of pounds, his peers across the world. Which is why we thought we had to do a web front end, something that basically gives an analysis and puts it in the hands of the people making decisions straight away, and in a way that they can just use it instantly, nothing to download, nothing to install, available more or less anywhere, and where they can share their results. So you can share your particular set of choices and implications just by bookmarking or sending the URL at the top there. So that was really helpful to give it some longevity, and we hope it will be for this particular model. The other aspect is the Excel aspect, where models last longest if people can actually use them and update them and adapt them to their own needs. And so what we've done is released everything here entirely open source. So all of the Excel, all the documentation, all the front ends are all open source. And in Excel, because Excel is probably the lowest modelling common denominator, in the sense that you can find it in pretty much every business person, every academic person's, most homes have a copy sitting there. So almost anyone can take it and adapt it. And the level of training required to do so is very little. And so by doing that and making it open source, we allow it to be used by as many people as possible and built on as many people as possible. It's early days of the global calculation of that process. We have done the same with a UK variant of this model, which we released 4 years ago. And even though it's 4 years ago, I'm still getting emails from people saying, with suggestions about how to improve the modelling, about how they've used it in their own work, in their own companies, and with their own ways that they can actually suggest that we draw conclusions from it. So we think the longevity will be helped by this. But it isn't just about longevity, about why we chose to use the Excel and web interface approach. It's also about the OR process and the way we want to go about it. Because another great benefit of Excel is that it's very easy to just get started and then sort of throw it away. So in terms of the OR process we followed, the first thing we did was that we built one of these, gave it a quick go over a month or so, and then threw that version away, just as a way of educating ourselves about the subject and about what might be involved. And from that, we actually then drew up our proper plans for how we were actually going to go about doing this work. And particularly by using an Excel spreadsheet, as opposed to any more formal or advanced or sophisticated modelling platform or language, we were able to actually draw together in the team a range of sort of domain experts from across the world. So we had a core team in our group of modellers, but we could actually involve a much wider group of people. And as you can see from the organisations, we have people based in 5 or 6 different countries, all collaborating together on this, and organisations to bring different viewpoints. And we were, basically, by having these different viewpoints, we were able to get lots of early debate about what the right way to do this was, and what the right approach would be, and what issues we have to take into account. And then we followed a very iterative process of doing, we've done about our 4th or 5th release of this model, where each time we do a quick burst, see how it looks, test it with people, figure out whether it works, and have another go. And we have followed what we hope are quite good OR processes as well on the way. We've always had internal quality assurance. Everything in the model has a second pair of eyes on every assumption and calculation and thought in it. We have in our department a modelling integrity team who make sure that we are following a good process and have documented everything and make sure it's correct, and they audit us. We've had paid external quality assurance line by line of our model to make sure it's right and documentation's right from Cambridge Architectural Research. We've published everything entirely in draft form, openly on the internet, and sought public feedback, where by public we don't really mean every member of the public, but all the kind of experts that have particular knowledge in particular fields or already done this work. And we've done user testing, and we've done comparing with other model results. Because I guess one of the kind of things I'd like to sort of conclude on in terms of my speaking bit is that we could have answered those questions, initial questions about, can we all live in that style, what's the best way of using £4 billion to spend, by using other existing models. Those models do exist. We have integrated assessment models out there in the world. But what we were trying to push for was getting that analysis and that thinking into a way that is more usable by more people, because we need more people to believe and take action on the results. So that's what we've been pushing for with the kind of thrust that we got there. And then the sort of unexpected benefit of making that push of getting it more accessible, more open, more interpretable by more people, is that we have actually discovered improvements in areas where the other existing models aren't. It's not that they aren't correct, it's they haven't highlighted the issues that turn out actually to be important, such as the agricultural yields. So in concluding sort of my little talky bit, I'd just like to say that if I had one sort of thing that I hope people would take away from our approach, it's to attempt to take modelling and put it in the hands of decision makers and think about how to do that in a safe and reliable way so that modelling has the impact it does. Because I noticed in government that a great many decisions get taken without a great deal of analysis, and I would really like to change that. Thank you very much. So I believe I have 5 minutes for questions. Ask anything?
The million-dollar question, what was the answer to your original question?
Can we have 10 billion people live as standard? Can 10 billion people have a standard style of living like mine, but we still have climate change? And the answer is yes. Thank heavens for that. It's even better than that. We feared that the answer might be yes, but only if you use technologies which are currently considered to be very speculative around seeding the oceans, drawing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, altering solar radiation. And the answer is we don't even need to do that. We can do it with known technologies. Even better than that, we don't need all the technologies. So if people truly don't want nuclear power, we can do it without nuclear power. If people think that renewables are too expensive, we can do it without renewables. So that's brilliant. However, what we've discovered is a couple of kind of qualifiers to that, and that is this role of yields. We really do have to think about yields, particularly of livestock yields, because there's a great ambition for a lot of the 9 billion people, from people we've talked to across the world, there's a great ambition to eat meat. And that's one of the markers of whether you reach the Western standard and style of living. And eating meat is the trickiest lifestyle choice. You get the most benefit of switching it off and going vegetarian. And if you switch it on, you need to do the most other action to compensate. So that is interesting. It's no way the government's going to promote vegetarianism. What we can do is we can work very hard on how we support new technologies and development to try and get the yields of food up. And that's an area, fortunately, that the UK is quite good at. So I think we're on good hits.
Sorry, rather naive question, but how do you just put the price of meat up in a sense it will work?
Sure. So if you put the price of meat up, there will be some equilibrium whereby people only eat meat. However, at that point, likely we won't tackle climate change, because the equilibrium for the economics of meat eating will not be the same as the equilibrium for actually freeing up the land in order to grow bioenergy and not deforesting in order to reduce emissions and therefore to tackle climate change.
What's the balance between you treating climate change in terms of human intervention or human impact on climate change and natural climate changes which are created with the forecast like El Nino and various other factors which have been with the world throughout its history?
Yeah, so we've tried to stick in this modelling to the human-caused climate change as much as we can analyse it today. So on screen now is a map that's iterated into different probabilistic views of temperature change. So we've tried to do it probabilistically, because it is all probabilistically, we don't really know what will happen. And that's because the different models forecast different events, such as talking about El Nino. And so the question about what should we do, given that there is also natural variability in climate change? Normally, the answer is, well, we're probably going to have to spend some money on adapting to make sure we can survive more flooding, crop failures, migration. But also, we probably need to go further to make sure we really don't just skim avoiding the worst effects of climate change in terms of the mankind scores, but really properly avoid going that far. Clark's back.
Tom, great presentation. Given the discussion we've had around big data and analytics at this conference, have you thought about reverse engineering all the options that people are putting in order to understand what the most popular option might
been around for 4 or 5 years, and we've got, I don't know, tens of thousands of pathways that people have actually sent in to us and said they're happy with, plus all the usage data. We've struggled to use that because we definitely know it's not a representative sample. So we definitely can't draw any statistical conclusions from it. However, we found it very useful in 2 ways. One is that we have example pathways. So we've forced various commentators to come up with their vision of the future. So, for instance, Friends of the Earth, and on the one hand, and say the National Grid on the other hand, have 2 very different views of the future, and neither of them were particularly numerate necessarily. So the National Grid is numerate, that's for example. Another one, Mark Grid, his was numerate. Beforehand, we forced them to come up with a numerate vision of what they would like. And so for instance, Friends of the Earth now, if you choose their pathway, they're not actually anti-carbon capture and storage anymore, they're neutral on it, which is a shift in position once they realise that their actual original position didn't add up. So that thing, by making kind of key stakeholders be numerate, can help. The other thing is we did, colleagues in Cardiff University, because we made this all open source as well, they took it on and they used it to run proper, deliberative, representative sample trials in the UK, and very interesting report about the way people think about stuff. Very fascinating reading about the way people think about these issues.
Can I ask a question about technology? You said the existing technology, we can reverse climate change for the lifestyle of 10 million people, can be sort of enhanced, if you like. But people are now considering, for example, cloning meat rather because of the livestock problem, or even hydroponics. So those type of disruptive technologies built into the model, or can be built into the models as it evolves.
So it sort of depends on the level of detail. It's a very high level model. So we have a choice about livestock yields, about basically how many kilograms of meat you get per piece of livestock per area, and so forth. Where to believe the high end of that, you really have to believe that we've gone into these slightly more advanced technologies. But we haven't specifically modelled each individual technology. What we try to gather together is the sort of summary of expert views about what's possible. Is that clear? So, I'll just say that if you want to know more, or you want to ask me more, those are my
Well, thank you for this opportunity to talk about how we use systems thinking in conducting the Monroe Review of Child Protection in England. We will tell you about the context, the big problems in child protection, before we then explore how we use systems thinking to analyse why the system had become severely dysfunctional. And then finally, we'll talk about how we use that analysis to guide the recommendations that we made, which has led to the implementation of radical reforms, which are having a very major effect upon the day-to-day lives and functioning of the child protection system. So, the context. Child protection system investigates possible cases of child maltreatment and then tries to do something to make the child safer. I won't go into the gruesome details of how people harm children, but the term maltreatment covers a range of physical, sexual, psychological abuse and neglect. When the harm happens by parents or carers, as you can imagine, there are specific problems for society because it can happen in a family home, that's a private space, so it's not so visible. And also, in most circumstances, the parent or carer is the primary source of protection for children. So the state has to take a different attitude in terms of how much it intervenes in the life of a family when it thinks that a child is being harmed in that setting. Social workers take the lead in general, but other professions play a major part. The police, health, education are all charged with heavy responsibilities in this area. So, the scale of the problem has become immense. It's not because British parents have gone wild and started beating up their kids. It's because society has become so concerned when a child is horrendously tortured and then killed that we have led to a policy and a culture where every professional, and in fact every member of the public, is encouraged to report any suspicion that a child is being harmed. And as a result, you will see from these statistics that although around 600,000 children get referred to social care each year, only 35,700 get put on child protection plans of children who are considered to be suffering or likely to suffer significant harm. And a very few number of children are removed. That figure also includes children removed just because of family crisis for a short time and all sorts of benign reasons. And then a large number of children get returned. The number who stay away permanently from their birth family is actually very, very small. All of those figures are slightly difficult to interpret because they also include people getting referred for lower level problems. I mean, every disabled child needs additional services. But you have to deal with two very, very big decisions, both of which are hard to get right. The first one is this child actually being maltreated? Did he fall or was he pushed? So you have the problem of knowing whether anything has happened. We also have a duty to predict what might happen, which is even harder to do. And we are dealing with very partial, ambiguous information. Not surprisingly, parents who have been harming their children can tell you lies. It might surprise you to know that, in fact, children can tell you lies because they want to protect their parents. So they cover up the harm that they are experiencing. And you will probably, if you read newspapers, be aware of what happens when things go wrong in terms of missing abuse. The recent stories from Rotherham are horrific, and it seems as if very large numbers of adults failed to interpret what they were seeing as child sexual exploitation. And it may be that some of you have the misfortune to also see that we've created an overzealous culture. If any of you had to take a child down to casualty with an injury, which is a normal part of parenting experience, in my view, you may well have found that you were subjected to an extremely uncomfortable level of questioning. And it's extremely scary to have somebody questioning whether you are a good enough parent and to raise the fear that you might lose your child. And then the other big, big decision is, do we need to remove the child? And again, most children who are being harmed will actually stay with their birth family, that you try to work with the family to make them better, because you're not dealing with a simple choice of bad home, good foster home. The outcomes in care are not good. The children in Rotherham who were in children's homes seem to have been more vulnerable to exploitation than other children. And so you make the decision on what is probably the best option for the child. But as you all know, low probability events happen, and you can get the death of a child who's been left with the family on the basis of the professional decision making. Why was the Review Commission? Well, mistakes have a high cost, obviously, to the child victim, to the families if they are wrongly accused. But it's also to professionals, because the level of public outcry is so clearly in the news at the moment of heads must roll when mistakes happen. And that has fueled repeated efforts to reform the system, but we haven't had the desired effect. They've actually had a lot of very harmful effects. You've got a very demoralised workforce, huge caseloads because of the huge referral rate, and there is no perceptible improvement, which has led to the public outcry becoming even more virulent. So when they asked me to do it, it was within a couple of weeks of the coalition government being formed. It was when they were wanting to look kindly, so they wanted this to be high profile. And I was formally invited by the Secretary of State for Education. I got a very, very broad remit, mainly because I wrote the remit for myself. Because I was already seeing it as a systems problem. I'd already been very focused on looking at how bizarre things were happening. I was aware of how many good intentions and really bizarre unintended consequences. I was very aware of how people kept trying to solve the small problem in front of their noses rather than the bigger issues. The guidance is a sort of concrete example of how that played out. Back in 1974, there was a 7-page document of guidance, and when I did the review, the page number was 390 in the main body of the guidance, plus another 424 on specific topics. So I was based in the department with a load of civil servants and absolutely masses of data, and I needed someone to help me to manage that data.
Thank you very much. So what I'm going to try to do now is give you an idea of the novel combination of systems approaches that we used to diagnose what was going wrong and to form recommendations for how it might be put right. So, the first one, please, we used causal loop diagramming from system dynamics, drawing on all of the information and data we had available. What we unearthed was what we came to call a compliance addiction map. And it describes how reforms try to improve things by increasing prescription. So, if there's a high belief that a prescriptive approach is a good thing, then you have a high target level of prescription. So, in the same direction, you get compliance enforcement. Then, moving in the opposite direction, the point about compliance enforcement is that you reduce the scope for applying professional judgment. That's what you want. Okay? You want that loop. It's a doing things right loop. It is, in fact, single loop learning. We're actually using systems thinking ideas from Agiris and Schern here. But this policy also produced ripple effects. If you reduce the scope that people have for using professional judgment, they're less satisfied in their work, they're therefore more likely to leave, which means that those who are left, on average, have got less experience, and that might have something to do with the public status of child and family social workers. Now, that stuff along the bottom, no one wanted any of those things, but they are still consequences of a policy of prescription. Now, there's a second ripple effect that led to a second balancing loop, which is actually a potential learning cycle. Prescription reduces the range of approaches that could be used with children and young people. And the second such, third systems thinking idea here, is actually the idea of requisite variety. Children and young people arise in a very wide variety of circumstances, so you need a wide variety of things you can do to help them if you're going to intervene effectively. If you reduce that variety, then the quality of interventions reduces. The resulting errors had the potential to challenge the idea that a high level of prescription would lead to good results, i.e. to trigger double loop learning. It's Agiris and Schern again, getting people to say, perhaps we're not doing the right thing here. But that double loop learning was not happening. This loop failed because prescription allows the defence, we just followed the rules. There's a reduced ability to learn from errors, and in fact it's Agiris again who calls this mechanism camouflaging. It's a way of hiding errors. It's another systems thinking idea. And what this does is it weakens the learning loop, B2. But as I'm sure some of you have seen, it's worse than that, because this effect made prescription more and more attractive to a workforce scared of being criticised by the public. There's a reinforcing effect, creating an addiction to prescription. In organisational terms, there's an organisational defensive routine. So in terms of benefits here, this high-level visualisation was published in the first Munro Review report and greeted very positively in the sector. It seemed to give people confidence that it had captured their experiences and helped make sense of them. It was seen to be important in creating trust between the review team and those working in child protection. And having distributed to other people, including other sectors, I think its insights are quite transferable. The second example was about understanding the past, designing a better future. In terms of OR process, we used group model building. A group of experts met together to think about the sector and look at it in detail. So, in a series of meetings, we got those people in a room. That's a real photograph. It's the strange anonymising blog. We looked at drivers of the sector, previous policies, their anticipated effects, their unanticipated consequences. Let me try to give a sense of what we uncovered there. So this is just a little excerpt from the large diagram we had. So, first policy to consider, standardised assessment requirements. Now, some initial assessments were dragging on and taking ages and ages to get done, taking weeks to get made. That new policy said, no, all of them have got to be completed within 10 days. Right? Absolutely. So what you get is less variability in the handling of cases. Second example of policy is the introduction of the integrated children's system. Cases were not comprehensively documented. They were documented in physical files that were hard to move around, and sometimes you couldn't even read the handwriting in them. I tried. The integrated children's system had set fields that had to be completed. They were electronic, so you could send them to anybody, and you could read typewritten text. Better information results. But there are unintended consequences of prescribing things in this way. Let's stay with the integrated children's system, because what you get is staff chained to computers. Some of the data we looked at indicated that there were staff who were spending 80% of their time, as one of them called it, feeding the beast, typing stuff into this computer system, not building the relationships with families that, as Irene has indicated, you need to make these subtle judgments about what's actually going on in the family environment. Returning to the standardised assessment requirements, well, we know this gives less scope for professional judgment, but some cases need thought, they need consultation with colleagues, they need more research to be done, they need more than 10 days. If you restrict them to 10 days, you get a decrease in the quality of outcomes for children, and worse than that, the social workers know they're not doing the best they can do, so they feel unsatisfied and alienated. Now, the whole causal loop diagram, which these are excerpts, was much bigger. Hold on to something fairly firm. Yeah, don't laugh. It's a typical example. For those who built this up over weeks in a row, this is a very meaningful diagram. You show it to other people, and it's a bowl of spaghetti, and that will be my reaction in your position too. But this map was behind much of the thinking in the review. It was used to explain what was wrong and to craft a set of recommendations that were systemically consistent. Now, what that systems thinking map told us was that the sector was in the grip of a set of reinforcing loops, all operating in a vicious way. System dynamics says that the intervention that's needed there is that one either breaks those loops to make them go away or tries to reverse them to turn them into virtuous circles. There were also balancing loops, which could have been learning loops, but various factors made them weak. System dynamics tells us, well, you need to attack the things that are making them weak to strengthen that learning effect. That large diagram also has purple things in it, key driving forces for the sector, which I will hand over to Eileen to tell you about.
Yeah, I really valued that gigantic causal loop diagram. I had a version of it pinned to the wall as I wrote my review, because it did keep helping me to keep the big picture in mind while I honed in on specific problems. But the analysis also brought out that within it there were certain things you could change and other things that you couldn't. Uncertainty pervades the work, and we can't eradicate it. The public want all children to be safe, which is an understandable thing. It's the idea that they believe it, that's the worrying one. And we did have politicians who were very naughty in reinforcing that idea. One of the things that's happened since my review, which hardly any of you will have noticed, I'm sure, is that the government has not joined in with blaming social workers when there have been high-profile deaths, which is a great change from Ed Ball's behaviour. We've also got a system of doing case reviews if a child dies. This was known to the child protection system, and they have always been person-centred. They find out that somebody failed to follow one of the several hundred procedures and blame them for what happened. And what they are now being encouraged to do is use a system-centred approach, so that they look at why do people make mistakes, what's the system doing. They also, we were really cursed by the power of managerialism. I just think it's a lousy way difficult and important things in the background. And that is why it failed to notice how much harm we were doing to children by clumsy, poor projection practice. If you have ever been on the receiving end of a clumsy child protection investigation, you will know how traumatic it is. And underlying it all was this belief that it was all a simple world. And so this is one sentence from my review which sort of sums up things, that we got into this defensive system that put so much emphasis on procedures and recording that insufficient attention is given to developing and supporting the expertise to work effectively with children, young people and families. Before David talks more about what we did, it is, what are we aiming for? We genuinely want services that support families to nurture children well. We don't want parents so scared of being considered abusive that they don't want to go to casualty, they don't want to ask their health visitor for advice. But we also do need to intervene at times, and we need to manage that categorisation better. But also we do need a system that finds out what impact we're having on children. It doesn't say smugly, all of my assessments were done to timescale, and therefore I have done good practice. And I think we have grossly underestimated how much harm we have done with clumsy practice. And we also want a system that can actually listen to the feedback or to new research and adapt in response to it. So we don't want something that is caught in the straitjacket of central government prescription.
Now, systems thinking ideas really acted together to be the integrating lens for 15 recommendations that resulted in. Together, these made up the policy advice. So that integrated set, 15 recommendations, had at their core the importance of creating a child protection service with the properties of a learning organisation. Those recommendations included the following. Recognise that professional expertise is not just in manuals, it's in skills, so you need to value and develop social work skills and expertise and professionalism. You also need to improve the public reputation of the profession to reflect this. You need to roll back prescription, reduce it, remove some of these damaging key performance indicators. We'll come back to that. Judge practice against evidence of children's progress, not whether some process has been complied with or some input has been put in. Okay? And use systems thinking to promote double-loop learning throughout the profession to help create a child protection service with the properties of a learning organisation. One which, to quote from the last report, instead of doing things right, i.e. following procedures, focused on doing the right thing, i.e. checking whether children and young people are being helped. The text in the report, as Eileen has indicated, was written with this systems understanding from this suite of systems ideas. Also, we took the insight that there was this collection of vicious circles, and we illustrated this with two of them. And you can find this diagram in the final report. So let's think about the benefits that resulted. We asked a senior civil servant to describe those for us, and these are some of the comments that she made. Causal loop thinking was introduced early in the review. It helps civil servants, ministers and critically leaders and frontline practitioners to think about reform of a whole system. Secondly, the idea of unintended consequence of a ripple effect is now in common parlance in various places. We changed the vocabulary, this civil servant wrote. Professor Munro's review, deployment of systems thinking, conversely has reinforced in the system a healthy debate about why slavish adherence to rules will only seek to de-skill social workers, because they won't think about judgments they're making, rather they'll think about the rule that they have to follow. Healthy debate about that. That's good. And lastly, amongst a wide range of people, I think there's acceptance that we have a better chance of understanding the why if we deploy causal thinking and modelling. Okay, but actual implementation, actual benefits, well, here we go. In May 2011, the last of the 3 reports was published. In July 2011, the Department for Education published A Child-Centred System, the government's response to the Munro Review of Child Protection. This completely or substantively accepted all of the recommendations. The Minister wrote to the heads of the range of agencies involved in child protection directors of children's services, police chief constables, heads of voluntary and community sector organisations, the Care Quality Commission, the NHS Confederation, the Royal College of Nursing, and more. And those letters said, quote, "The government accepts Munro's fundamental argument." And it then outlined how the government would support, quote, "the move towards a child protection system with less central prescription and interference, where we place greater trust and responsibility in skilled professionals at the front line." Now, to give some very practical examples of implementation of what has happened, there is now new statutory guidance for social workers, and this hugely reduces the extent of prescription. It's down from 700 pages to 90 pages, and they concentrate on rules for cooperation between agencies, but they leave most other activities to the professionals themselves. For example, the hard timescales for assessment, that 10-day thing, that's gone. Okay? Staff are expected to make a judgment on timeliness and quality. And what's happened there is there's been a reintroduction of requisite variety back into the system. That new guidance was published in March 2013 and it became effective from April 2013. To improve the status of the profession, one recommendation was the creation of the post Chief Social Worker for England. This was done and advertised, and in May 2013, Isabel Trower was appointed. There is a new inspection framework. In November 2013, and by the way, this is why we're only talking to you about this now, it takes a long time to get implementation in government. In November 2013, Ofsted introduced a new framework that covers all aspects of a child's journey, not just the different bits provided by different agencies. And inspectors no longer look just at process and just at written records. They talk to social workers, they look at feedback from children, and they must look for evidence of what the consequences were for children. So, to close. The aim has been to improve child protection, to get closer to this image of a good child protection system, and Eileen asked some children to draw their representation of a good child protection system. The use of a range of systems ideas was methodologically novel, and many of the insights it produced are transferable. The use of that range of systems thinking ideas and approaches was what integrated much of the data in the submissions received by the review team, in the interviews conducted, and in the numerical data that was collected. Systems thinking approaches were central to creating a holistic understanding of what was wrong, and they gave rigour and coherence to the review's final policy recommendations, and those recommendations are being implemented. Thank you very much indeed.
One question.
Question?
No.
Yes, Sue there. And then Sue there.
Just a very quick question. How can you ensure that the government maintains good behaviour to your children?
I got a quote from David Cameron and another one from Michael Gove. I keep trotting out. So I trust if they change, every newspaper will remind them that they've jumped ship. It is a risk, the way a new government, and the security of rules is so appealing in this intensely emotional area of work. And I'm totally happy to have rules if there was one right way to do things. But children and their families are just so varied, you need skill to actually apply principles to each family, rather than try and fit them into your little box.
We probably better say to take Stuart's question.
Just early on, you mentioned there's a lot of data that you had available. That was one of the reasons you want to employ systems thinking. I was wondering to what extent that data being employed in actually validating some of the relationships in the systems thinking.
Yeah, thank you. Yes. We have people sitting in a room telling us this is demotivating staff, this is making them leave. Right. What I was able to do, thank you civil servants, was go and say, can you find me turnover data? And they would go and bring me the Excel spreadsheets. Not for the whole of the UK, but for the ones they could find. I could look at that data and go, yeah, this is rising. Yeah, this is certainly not falling. And I could take that back into the room and go, yeah, it looks as if that one's right. You tell me staff are demotivated in a few places, a few regions. There were questionnaires with staff asking them questions like that. When I saw opportunities to do that, I went and asked for data. I never found the data that refuted the connections that my group was telling me was there. If I had found those connections, I would quiz them very hard indeed. And all the data we found, and I've got the spreadsheets, was entirely in line with the model version that was done.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? First of all, thanks to Society for the opportunity to talk you through one of our case studies and also for the shortlist for the President's Medal. Just to kick off two fascinating discussions around two extremely important areas in the UK. Obviously from an environmental perspective, something that's important to us all, and social care, probably one of the most important areas that we've certainly heard about of late. What I'd like to do today is talk through a story that will have a major impact on the UK economy. Something that will impact all of us in here today, and something that right at the core of that solution is the practical application of OR techniques in a real world complex problem. That story is around us, Capgemini, helping Network Rail to become an industry leader in asset management. Most of you will know Network Rail as the owner-operator of all of the UK rail infrastructure, from track, power, telecoms, stations, etc. And it's an area where myself and Grania have been working for the last 2 years, helping them develop decision support solutions in the area of asset management. So I mentioned that this project focuses on impact on the economy. Mark Carney, the new Chief Executive of Network Rail, recently described the UK railway as the artery of the UK economy. Now, that might sound a little grand, but actually what he's meaning there is the transportation of people and goods around the UK using the railway is actually fundamental to keeping the economy moving. We see that in the drive for increased capacity in the UK network to fuel economic growth through investments in £1 billion investments in HS2, Crossrail and other projects, but also in the impact of severe service disruption. We've seen earlier this year when flooding hits the Devon coast, and many of you will have seen the seawall and the railway being washed away. That really did cut off the southwest peninsula of the UK. So in that context, it is critical from economic terms that Network Rail maintain the safety and integrity of that asset, and at the heart of that, it's critical that we make the right decisions on how we manage the portfolio of assets. Over the next 15, maybe 20 minutes, Gronnie and I will take you through an overview of one of the critical projects at Network Rail of late. We'll talk you through the problem, the challenge that Network Rail were facing. Gronnie will take some time to take you through what was the role of OR in that solution. And then we'll focus the last few minutes on the business value, both to Network Rail, but also to the wider stakeholder group. So we start with the challenge, the problem that Network Rail faced. Before I go into a little bit more detail, I want you to hear from Patrick Bossert, who is the Director of Assets Information at Network Rail. If we have a video that works.
The challenge we face is that the railway has working practices that date back almost 200 years in how it manages its assets. And over the years, it has got more and more efficient, without any question. But the
acknowledge that, again, as in that early week or month in that project, the key challenge that the project sponsor came to me with was we recognise the need for the decision support. We've tried this previously and failed due to a number of key barriers that we face. One is the nature of the data environment, so the complex multitude of systems that data resides in, the quality of that data, but also the ability to combine that data in a meaningful way that the engineers can actually understand and make use of. And the other area that we set out as a challenge was the existing capability, both in terms of the engineers themselves, how do they use insight, information, data, but also from a technology perspective, the capability to capture, store and manage that data. Now, if I, just before I hand over to Claudia to take us through the role of OR, given that I sit in the business analytics team, many of my colleagues often ask, what is OR about this? Okay, it's consulting terms an end-to-end solution. You've been involved in designing and deploying a solution that involves people, capability, process, technology. I talked about cultural change up front. What is the OR component? And for me, to answer that, I come back to the definition of what is OR. And many of you will be more than familiar with the definitions on the screen, but for me, the common theme is complexity, analytical methods, and making better decisions. And this entire project that we're working with Network Rail on is around managing that complex environment of data, trying to deliver a degree of insight from that complex data. And now we have over 1,000 engineers up and down the UK walking the track, making better decisions with that insight in their hands, mobile as they proceed. Just pick up a bit more detail on that. Ronnie?
Can you all hear me? Because I know I don't talk very loud. Yeah? Good. Talking about the umbrella of OR, there's three things I want to talk about. So there's the data, there's the alignment problems with the data that have been had, and finally I want to talk about the predictive element of the last solution. On data, Russell referred to the decision-making abilities that you get with operational research, and data is the foundation of that, so it's obviously a key part of the solution. And I know the word big data gets bandied about a lot, and people have different definitions of what it might mean, but this feels like there was an element of big data involved. So you have the variety, the volume, and the velocity of data involved in this project. So you have variety in terms of the sources of information from across Network Rail, and also variety in terms of the types of data that you're trying to pull through, so from things that are in spreadsheets to image files, JPEGs, and so on, trying to pull them all together. Then we move on to the volume aspect, so the last solution has 30 terabytes of data, and then the velocity, which is about the speed of information coming in, and every day we're adding more information that's coming off the tracks, putting it in there. And just to sort of explain from a real perspective the importance of data.
That is decision support. It's revolutionary in as much as it puts the data in the hands of the end user just when they need it. I would liken it to when they introduced X-rays into medical science. Labs provides all the data at the right time, all beautifully aligned, and with some data streams that people wouldn't have seen before.
So that was Richard Cofield, the Anglia Group Management Director. And connecting to alignment there, and I'll explain a little bit the sort of technical aspects of the alignment process. But it's really key to the whole solution. So what we were doing was taking this sort of incredibly complex data flow, data from lots of different places, and transforming that into an interface that the engineers out on the track their iPads or sitting at a desktop back in the office could understand. So we worked with them to develop this interface, which may look complicated to you, but it really helps them. It lines up all the information in one place at the top of your track, and then underneath it you have all the different sets of data aligned. So that moves me on to the next piece of the presentation. minute amounts of detail about the track. But I quite like this picture because it allows me to describe the sort of linear assets as a system of assets. So you can see under the train you have the rail, and then in parallel underneath that you have the sleepers that sit underneath that, and then you have the ballast, the sort of gravel that sits underneath. And that's sort of like a system of assets. But you can also see in the background there's a bridge, and you also have the overhead wires. So that's sort of like the system of assets. When you try to align that data, some of it's relatively easy to align. You can use your GPS information and a GIS system to identify where that bridge is in relation to the track. But when you start to compile information from these measurement trains, it becomes a little bit more complicated. These measurement trains are running over the track all the time. You have calibration issues with the train. So over time, you get wear and tear on wheels as they go out of calibration. So you get slight variations in reporting. So how much of that is due to the train and how much of that is due to degradation of the track? So the million-dollar question for an aircraft. Another way of looking at that is the top image there is the unaligned data. So that's traces across the same part of the track. And then the bottom part is once it's aligned, so once it's been through the land solution. But how you get from there to there is quite a complex process. So working with our third-party supplier, Holloway systems, they helped us to do that. I was going to play a short video, and I hope you'll be able to hear this.
Traces represent multiple recordings of the same track. Note that some variation between recordings represents actual changes in the track over time. This is the information we are interested in. In order to align the data, we must first define a baseline recording, against which all other recordings are located. This is generated by analyzing the curvature of the track from the GIS system against the measured curvature from the recording vehicle. We then take each recording in turn and run a localized 100-meter normalized cross-correlation between the recording and the baseline every 100 meters along both recordings. Where the normalized cross-correlation is above the threshold, normally 0.8, we assume a good match and allow the correlation to be applied to that location. We then interpolate between all the correlations we have and apply them as location corrections to the recording being analyzed. So if 100 meters earlier the error was -20 meters, and 100 meters later it's -10 meters, then at this point we would correct about 15 meters. The result is that the data align against the baseline, even if sections do not correlate properly, as the error tends to drift over time rather than being a step change. Same data can then be viewed in its aligned form.
So that moves me on to the third element of the operational research element of this project. So it's about predictions, predictive analytics. And just to start, I was going to sort of take a step back from operational research and the algorithms. And I just want to quote Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who said that the light which experience gives us is the lantern on the stern that shines only on the waves behind. And it's an interesting idea about looking at history, but actually we're in the 21st century, we have plenty of technology, and in a sort of world without war, we don't have to rely just on historical data and say that's it, we don't know anything about the future. We can use historical data to predict the future. So to extend that analogy, it's like being able to take the light to the front of the ship and shine it on the waves ahead to see what's coming. I have another little video from our project sponsor, who's also the head of asset management track, who explains the sort of power of the predictive element for network rail and how it's changing how they work. This is super detailed.
Having better data is fundamental to everything that we do. However, for us, what really becomes important is the analysis and the understanding of what data is trying to tell us. So one of the things that Orbis is doing is it's trying to create a linear asset decision support tool where basically we can align the different data sets and actually understand the assets in relationship to each other. Just seeing the data is phenomenal, and to be honest, we're really excited about being able to overlay the data in a system of this type. But what really makes that special is the fact that the system can become intelligent. So based on our historic data and our information, what the system can actually do is predict when to do the intervention. And it can understand if you do a certain type of intervention, what the output will be.
And you have an example on your screen there that shows a track some of the engineers at Rail to run scripts on top of this data to try and draw in more insights from it, to predict areas with similar faults or to try and analyse other sort of characteristics within the data. And the third step that we're working on with them at the moment is about how we can take this information from the tool and use it to really work on sort of whole life costing and predictive investment planning options as well to really get the full benefit from the data, from the solution. That seems like a good way to hand over to Russell to discuss a bit more about impact.
Thank you. Okay, so the business value is the benefit of the solution. You've heard from one or two of the senior network rail clients and videos and hearing that the solution does revolutionise the way the engineers manage track assets. We keep referring to making better decisions, but what decisions? Specifically, we're talking about here the engineers that decide when, where, and how to maintain or renew track assets. An example that we had recently was an engineer who had a continual repeat fault somewhere in his section in Anglia. In the training session of using lads who were straight to that area and identified through the combination of data sets, made clear that his interventions were not solving the problem. He identified interesting groundworks underneath that and eventually found the root cause was a join of clay and rock underneath the particular track. His continued intervention was only making that problem worse. He removed a planned renewal of that track, which would have been multiple millions of pounds in cost. He removed that, a much quicker intervention in terms of taking that out and laying a different formation or foundation solved the problem. So we've seen many examples of where significant savings can be made through making better informed decisions on maintenance and renewal. In terms of total value, Network Rail have the business case for this has now been validated and demonstrated. There's over £125 million worth of direct savings from making better decisions on maintenance. And that £125 million is now being invested in other areas of the network where we're able to identify future interventions that are planned. But as well as the financial value, there's significant benefit from Network Rail from a safety perspective. Of course, it is a safety critical business, and that's passenger safety and operator of the workforce. Having this data on the iPad, on the desktop, means fewer engineers need to walk the track when it's operational. That in itself is a huge safety benefit. But also customer service, so you and I, all of us as train users, being able to predict when failures are likely to occur and proactively manage those reduces the failure, reduces the downtime of the track, and will lead to fewer announcements to say the train's been delayed because of a signal failure or a fault or overrunning maintenance. Key thing for me, however, is having spent 2 years at Network Rail, from what I've observed from when we started talking about the potential to develop solutions like this to now where, as I say, 1,000 engineers are out there using the solution, is the change in culture to more informed, evidence-based decision-making that the engineers are using there across all aspects of asset management. So working with engineers, they tend to want information, they want insight, they don't mind complexity and information, but being able to give them that insight in a way that's useful for them has driven a significant change in culture that we're already seeing as being significant benefits to Network Rail and the travel public. So to summarise, it's clear to me that Network Rail does have an important role to play in the economy and future economic growth. CEO, my family's now geological